everyone. I'm sure you've noticed the car songs playing in the background as you came in. Loudly. They were put on a CD just for tonight, and they can be purchased for $5 at the end of the evening for all who are interested. Although, I think that there aren't any left. Can't hear you? There. Better? Okay. But there's a sheet back there if you want to put your name down, because we can get as many as we want. So if you didn't get one and you still want one, just put your name on there and we'll get in touch with you. The arrival of the automobile brought Lakefield into the age of modern travel. A story on the front page of the Paper Examiner, dated August 20th, 1908, tells of the first automobile in Lakefield. The proud owner was local undertaker and furniture dealer Charles L. Bickle, my third cousin. Yay! Obviously, these vehicles needed gasoline and mechanics. Lakefield had a population of approximately 2,000 by the 1950s, and we had at least 7 gas stations and garages. Our group decided to cruise Highway 28 through Lakefield and visit each one, starting with Crawford's at the south end of the village. But not until my friends and I share our change in order to get $1 worth of gas. That should let us cruise the whole of Saturday night. Off we go. Okay. Are you ready? Meet Liz and Stu Crawford. Just Liz. Yeah. Okay. Okay, the guys decide. Okay, do you want to stand up there?
Testing. I don't know if they were using it. Gonna have to go fix it, Stu. Come on, Stuart. How do you turn this on?
It's already on.
It's already on? Yeah. Can you hear me?
No. You don't need a mic, Liz.
Okay. I'm Liz Jameson, Ruth and Jim Crawford's daughter, and there was Stuart, who's up here, Winston, and Lyndon. I don't remember much about the garage. Just remember playing back in the wrecking yard at the back, and finding a little bit of money back there. But anyways, the garage was located on Highway 28, just as you're coming in past the Maples. Dad bought it from Russ Hopkins in 1954. Dad did the mechanical work, and my Uncle Charlie, Dad's brother, he did the front end alignments. There's a few people from around Lakefield that worked there, Stan and Joe Coons, Jay Cuddlestone, Murray Utah, Dale Clark, and Choppy Stave. There's a few of them. I'm sure there's many more. Stan Coons, he started his apprenticeship at Dad's garage in 1958, and he stayed there until 1963 when he got his mechanic's license. We also had stock cars, ran at Bell's, and Choppy Staves was a driver for one of them. And he used to race around the track, and I remember Stuart said that he used to drive the tow truck around the track sometimes, and I don't think he had his license, but anyways. The garage was open 7 days a week, but they only did car repairs and maintenance from Monday to Saturday. Sunday was when just the pumps were open. We got full service. Car filled up, your windows cleaned, your tires and oil checked and everything. You don't get now. Nope. Okay. Okay, we sold Supertest gas while we had the garage, and from 64 to 67, Dad dealt in farm equipment, mainly Kopchak and Oliver. We sponsored hockey and lacrosse teams. One was the midget hockey team, which Stuart played on. I also was told that there was a really good pinball machine there. I don't remember that. And also there was always cold pop, a thing filled with ice that there's pop in there so they could get something cold. My Aunt Faye, Dad's sister, told me that the Lakefield police used to sit in our lot and wait for the speeders coming around Maple so that they could catch them. And Dad wasn't too happy about that. He used to get on his bulldozer and drive towards them, and then they Aunt Faye didn't think that Dad would stop if they didn't move, but they usually did. Also, my brother Winston and Stuart said that Garnet Sanders, who was the police chief back then, would come to the lot and he'd honk the horn waiting for Dad to come out. If Dad didn't come out, usually he was hiding because he didn't want to talk to him, he'd start the blow the horn or honk the horn, and then the lights would go on, and then they'd sit in there and talk for a while, so I guess Dad didn't get anything done. Mike Brown and Jack Leahy, they sold mini bikes, Honda mini bikes and snow cruisers, and they rented some space from us. And then when Dad died in 1970, Mike and Jack bought the garage, and it's now called Julian Plaza. And that's about it that I know of it.
Thank you. Right, do we have any sound from up there? We do now? Okay. All right. Is there anyone here tonight that had a connection to that garage? No? Oh, there's one back there. I think it was Sally's hand I saw up. I don't know what her connection was. Anyway. Thanks to the prophets for all of that information. Now, we cruise up the hill to the garage we refer to as the Sunoco. Oh, Liz stole somebody's glasses. No? Yes. Yes? Okay. They're here. You want them? Okay, now we cruise up the hill to the garage we refer to as the Sunoco. In the early days, Sam Baker was the owner of the garage. In the end, for a number of years, Walter McGill had a tinsmith shop in the back of the building. That would be early on. This garage was located immediately east of the former Lakefield District High School. Between the building and the Coyle garage was a white clapboard house where Judson and Clover Pugh lived with their 4 children, Joan, Norma, John, and Brenda. Then around 1946, after the war, Bill Wood and Elmer Graham owned and operated a Sunoco service station, and later it was sold to Oscar Creighton, and Braden Dunford ran his plumbing business out of the storage shed at the back of the building for a while. Many of the young lads used to hang out there and did fun stuff, like bet on who could lift the anvil. Oh, Dick Martin could. He even announced there that he was going to propose to Bev Freeburn and asked Jerry Foster to stand up for him, which Jerry did immediately. We always wondered what guys talked about when they hang out. Now we know. Frank Edwards was owner around 1960, and this was the popular hangout location for many of the high school boys during lunch and breaks. Girls were never allowed in there. John Choppy Staves was taking his apprenticeship there. Doug Wilson and Hugh Kidd worked there as well. I imagine there were many more. Did any of you work there? Okay. Woody Farrell says he was best friends with Frank Edwards and knew him well. And he was at the Sunoco garage one day when he got a call saying his grandfather's farm was on fire. Rick Wilford said he would follow Woody. Frank told Rick not to bother, as he'd never catch him. Frank Edwards later sold the garage to Frank Coyle when he got the Sunoco station in Peterborough. If you patronize this garage, put your hand up. Well, of course, there are a lot of people. Mostly guys. Now we cruise next door, where Frank Coyle has the White Rose garage, and I will call on Judy Coyle to tell us all about it. Again, the boys are too shy. Right? For sure. I mentioned it to Doug and he started to turn red from his neck up.
So this isn't on, so I'll do my best to turn it on.
It is
It should be on. It's not. I don't think yours is on. It's
Turn mine off, okay? I can do that.
Somebody should turn that up, at least tighten the nut up on it.
It's got- It's off. Okay, it's off now.
To those of you that don't know me, I'm Judy Coyle.
Yeah, don't hold this at my mouth, right? I'm not used to speaking with a microphone and especially speaking in such a large crowd. I didn't expect it. I expected this small little group of people that was going to be really easy to talk to. So I'm Gordon Iona Coyle's oldest daughter, only daughter. I have 3 younger brothers who should be here tonight but aren't. So I'll just start and talk about what I remember and the little bits of information I got from my dad. So my grandfather, Frank Coyle, was definitely a businessman who saw an opportunity for a business and then found a way to make it happen. In 1939, he purchased the property at 55 and 57 Bridge Street and built the front portion of the still existing business and opened Coyle's Garage. At that time, he already had a trucking business operating, hauling nepheline ore out of the nepheline mine. The back portion of the building was built in 1948. The cement blocks were handmade. They were built on site with a hand block machine and they cost 10 cents a block to make. The whole building, including the windows, the wiring, the whole bit, was built for $30,000, which is amazing. Frank being Frank wasn't just content with the service station and trucking business. He also added in 1950 a Mercury Lincoln dealership. George Ford, his nephew, came to work for him, and he was 21 at that time, and he was sent to school in Toronto, to the Goodyear Tire School. He learned about vulcanizing and other things about tires that I wouldn't begin to be able to explain. George was a tireman at Coyle's until he retired in the 80s. According to my dad, the Sunoco station sat on a narrow lot beside them, and the building was covered most of the frontage of the lot with a single gas pump installed tight to the front of the building. Some of you probably remember it. I barely remember it. There was also a Ford tractor dealership. I'm not sure the years it was operated. Maybe one of you might remember it. Frank was a gadget guy too. Maybe some of you remember seeing the hovercrafts he bought that were there, sat on trailers. They were orange. They were these creepy looking things. My brothers and I, we weren't allowed to use them, but my cousins, Ron and Perry, they certainly got enjoyment out of operating them. Theo Downs was Frank's first mechanic in 1939, along with several other employees over the years. Bill Blewett, who was Joe Blewett's uncle, Ron McMoyle, Wayne Drake, Ralph Jackman. He drove the buses and the charters for years and then worked in our parts department. Gord Ball was a longtime employee who worked out at the front pumping gas for probably close to 30 years. Pat Collins was a mechanic when I was young. Those are just some of the names I can think of that were directly tied to the service station. There were many more who worked in other portions of the business known as Frank S. Coyle Limited. I think all of Frank's grandchildren pumped gas over the years, along with many, many other Lakefield teenagers. I remember when I started pumping gas at the age of 14, I was miffed that my dad wouldn't let me wear the outfits my older cousin Darla got away with when she pumped gas. Do you remember, Doris? Bikini tops and short shorts. He operated a White Rose station at this site until 1962 when White Rose, the Canadian oil company, was purchased by Shell Canada. The service station continued to operate as a Shell station until the mid-90s when a switch to Esso was made. In 1976, my dad, Gord Coyle, took over the operation of the gas bar and service station, and in 2003, a new gas bar with a McDonald's was built by my brother Greg Coyle, who then sold it in 2005. We as a family moved to the family house located at 55 Bridge in 1976. Frank, Marjorie, Jean, and Gord moved to this house in 1939. Most of us have lived in this house with our own families at one time or another. As you know, my brother Doug Coyle continues to operate the tire and auto shop, and he and his wife Joanne, along with their children, live in the house now. Their son Scotty Coyle is now apprenticing as a mechanic and will probably continue in his dad's footsteps. The Coyle family has enjoyed over 80 years in business in Lakefield.
Thank you, Judy. Anybody have any relation to
Mostly family, I think. Oh, there's one.
I remember my father, Harold Coombs, telling me that he helped pour the cement for those blocks that they used to build the building. But I'm not sure how many he said that they poured, but it was a big number.
Okay, thanks, Isma. Our cruise continues on to the bridge, where we meet the Foster family at City Service. My friend Sally Foster Reed.
Mine's off now.
There you go. You got it.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear because I was told I was to speak up. Thank you for allowing me to share my memories of being the daughter of a graduate. I am Sally Foster Reed, the youngest child of Florence and Clarence Foster. Dad was born in the township of Burley Falls and like most young men worked hard to carve a place in life for himself. My parents met when my dad was a farmhand on the 14th concession of Smith and my mom was the daughter of a farmer a few doors down the road. On January 11th of 1922, my parents married and at that time began their life together in Peterborough. Dad was to be a cooper, but with many people, life changes. Mom and Dad moved to Lakefield where they purchased a home and a building that was to become Foster's Garage. I regret not listening closer to when the family history was being discussed, as I know there were many interesting parts of my parents' journey in life that I missed, but hopefully you'll enjoy my memories. The building that was to become the family garage was located on the south side of Bridge Street, between two bridges. Yes, Lakefield had two bridges up till 1974. The west bridge spanned the canal, and the east side bridge, which was longer, spanned the sluice. When I was trying to obtain information on the building, I learned originally the land belonged to Colonel Strickland, a Dave Smith, James Roseborough, the Canadian Cement Company, and Mr. Fitzgerald, and eventually was purchased by the Foster family in 1926. I cannot imagine how life was with a 2-year-old son and a new baby girl. With the encouragement of their parents, they started a business which supported our family of 11, plus anyone else who needed a home. It must have been a daunting task starting out on your own, and therefore, in 1933, Dad signed a partnership with City Service, a company which started in Oklahoma with headquarters in Toronto. City Service became Citco in 1960. How Dad learned his trade, I do not know, but in that age, they were very clever, not having a computer to rely on. He could fix almost anything, automobiles, tractors, boat motors, any type of farm equipment, wooden objects, but most of all, little girls' hearts. Family was the be-all to end-all in the Foster home. When I found one of Dad's accounting books, it took me a minute to understand how the importance of payment of potatoes, chickens, or just a plain handshake was. I never thought that there would not be food on our table, even though many of the foster children brought home extra mouths to feed. I have an accounting book with a few outstanding debts from some of my friends' parents. Doreen, and she is not here, she's on holidays, but Doreen, thanks for offering to pay the $1.40 from 1939. I told her, let's forget about that, but could we talk about the interest? Oh darn, my mistake. Doreen's dad paid in full. Dad instilled in all of his children that we work as a unit. All my siblings took turns helping in the garage as needed. With a family of 9, Dad did not need to hire extra people. My oldest brother Lauren joined the Navy, worked in GE, and did welding in my dad's garage. The west side of the original garage was divided, and it became his welding shop. Jean, I am certain, had her job as a child covering the garage when my dad tried to find time to have lunch. As Topsy always said, Dad made her an independent lady because while spending time at the garage with him, she learned that she could master looking after her own vehicles. Lauren's interests came from the foster family were not only mechanical, especially motorcycles, but woodworking. When Lauren purchased a motorcycle in later life and realized he needed help moving and maintaining the bike, he made what I refer to as a lazy Susan. A few years later, while looking through a Harley-Davidson flyer, I found that they sold a turntable for motorcycles. Guess he was ahead of his time. Not only did Dad manage the garage, he was a husband, a father, a helper on his in-laws' farm, as well as working in the field. But in my eyes, he became an inventor. When his middle child, Alice, contracted polio, he made certain that he did everything to make her life easier. Dad built a bridge across the ditch so Alice could access our home better. He made a stretcher so she could be at home after many operations, just to mention a few of his accomplishments. When Alice bought her first car with all the hand controls, Dad never mentioned the fact that he and Lauren had made similar adjustments for a lady's car who also had polio. Maybe not as sophisticated as Alice's, but it certainly made Miss Reed's ability to drive a lot easier. What fun memories I have when Mary bought her first car. I think it was a 1949, but I do know it was a Chev with the rounded, and I think you guys call it bullet back. She brought it to Dad's garage and we would all go to help sand. We thought this was fun, but now I think it was slave labor. Happy times at the old garage. What do I remember about my brother Jerry in the garage? When it was his turn to cover the lunch period, we would go to the garage with him. Dad's old tow truck sat between the garage and the canal. Treasure haven for the youngest 3, even though we were not supposed to play in it. It was too close to the canal. Judy, Jerry, and I would pile in. Jerry driving, Judy navigating, me pressing and turning any knobs that would move and imagining all the places we could go. Sometimes we even got it to roll down the knoll toward the logs, but if we could not get it back up the hill before Dad or Lauren got back, we were in trouble. I still remember the bee's nest in that old grader, as well as the noise that the horn made. That horn didn't go beep beep or anything special like today. It went kind of ah-ooh, ah-ooh. It was weird. When Jerry moved to Edmonton, he still hung onto his garage upbringing as he became parts manager at the Ford plant. Who was allowed to drive my dad's cars? Not me. He took great pride in his vehicles. After all, I feel he thought it represented how he ran his business. It was my sister Judy and if I remember correctly, Mary that had that privilege. Were they the favorites? I don't think my parents had such children. We were all favorites. I remember my dad trying to stay up later on Friday and Saturday nights because of the Legion. How many people remember where the Legion was located in the 50s? And does anybody remember the lay of the land? Yeah. The Legion was directly across from our garage, and the driveway took a steep dip towards the water. Not the way it is today. Getting cars out of the parking lot at the Legion in those days was not an easy feat, considering the condition that some were in. It was quite an incline, and many a vehicle ended up in the garage lot. Dad's worst fear was that someone would hit the gas pumps. Thank goodness, no one did. Eventually, the Legion moved to 10 John Street, and Dad slept easier. Dad was quite a man, so you can imagine how surprised I was when I learned that he fired a gun. Although I do not have the date, the newspaper article states that Clarence Foster, garage proprietor, surprised 3 men at 3 a.m. and fired a shotgun at their fleeing car. The article states that Dad was sleeping in his office after frequent break-ins. When the 3 men entered his garage, he inquired as to what they were doing. After a chase at high speed along the highway from Lakefield to 4 miles west of Peterborough, police arrested 3 men from Toronto. They were charged with breaking into the garage and theft of gasoline. After Dad fired at the car, Sergeant Wiggs, accompanied by Constable Clark, gave chase and said that it reached 95 miles per hour. Clark peppered the fleeing car with a revolver in his left hand, and he drove with his right. Wow, that must have been a night to remember. I've talked about my dad and my siblings, but I've not said much about my mom. This was a family business, and she was the glue that held our family together. She was the person who I saw first thing in the morning. She'd been up already, fed Dad, had breakfast for the rest of us. There was always food at the table when the 12 o'clock siren blew. You all remember that, I'm sure. We would come piling in for lunch. Dad would bring home for lunch whomever car he was fixing that day. How did she know how much food to prepare? I couldn't have done it. But her motto was, the door is always open for anyone. Our family garage also held buses. In fact, it housed the Ferguson bus line. Dad drove bus for Mr. Ferguson and thoroughly enjoyed this time, especially when it involved the hockey teams. That included what was to become the Peterborough Petes. I remember sitting on Dad's knees as he charted the map as to where he was going, and I wanted to go with him. When Dad was away, the family still maintained the garage, especially the boys. At the end of the business day, the money was brought to Mom at the house. During one of Dad's bus runs, Mom decided to take down the stovepipes in the upstairs bedroom for cleaning. She also decided that hiding the money in the upstairs stovepipe hole was a good idea. Dad came home later that night, and as he was tired and cold, he decided to light a fire in the downstairs stove. Boy, there was a lot of excitement. How was he to know that he almost set his garage profits on fire? I don't think Mom ever took the stovepipes down again without telling Dad. When I was younger, I thought my dad had the best girlfriend in the world, as she brought the biggest basket of fruit to our house at Christmas. It contained a large bottle of ginger ale that had a map of Canada on the bottle. I learned the provinces off of that bottle. Mary Mackenzie was my dad's bookkeeper. But when you're as young as I was, who cared about a bookkeeper when there was a Christmas basket from a person who was a girl and a friend to my dad and my mom? Was that not my dad's girlfriend? Mary was a great bookkeeper and a wonderful friend to the Foster family. I'm lucky enough to have the silent secretary that she used at the garage. On some hot, humid days, I occasionally get a smell of oil that evokes memories of Dad, the garage, and Mary Mack. What a terrific girlfriend. Oh, almost forgot to tell you about my memories of the garage. Smoking. I did try it, girls. Rolling into the gas pumps. But before that, let's go back to my time there with my siblings. Dad's old tow truck was really great. I remember the first and the last time I tried to drive it. No, I didn't go in the canal, but I did leave it down the knoll. Don't remember who got it back or my punishment. When we covered lunch times, we were allowed a treat. Pot, chips, chocolate bar, etc. The only stipulation was that we tell Dad what we chose. Once, while I was doing lunch shift with a friend, and not Sharon, who was 12-ish and already smoking, she convinced me I should take up the habit. Guilty, guilty. I took a package of smokes, we rode our bikes to the field behind my house and proceeded to smoke the whole package. I was very sick, whether it was the smokes or the fact that I took the cigarettes without telling Dad. The guilt I felt never left. I do know that I never smoked or forgot what I had done. And as for rolling into my dad's garage, no, I wasn't drinking. I was 6 years old. I fell out of our neighbor's car and rolled into the gas pumps. Hugs and kisses from my dad, not to mention my first candy from a boy, made everything better. That garage held great memories for me. First and last cigarette, first chocolates from a boy, and spending time with Dad. I won't bore you with any more of those stories, as there are too many. I will go on with the next stage of my dad's life. In 1962, after 36 years at his Bridge Street garage, Dad decided to retire. The building was taken over by Delbert Thompson. I believe that Delbert Thompson was a mechanic. He ran a garage business from this location. Archie Kidd worked for him. The Grain brothers, Bev, or Sweeney, and Elmer had a woodworking, antique, refinishing, selling business in this location during the early 70s. In the 70s, Mr. Graham sold the building to Elaine and Willie Huffnagel, and Lakefield Antiques was born. The Huffnagels ran this till the building burnt in 1979. The night the garage burnt, I stood looking out the window in my family room, watching part of my family's history disappear. Many things went through my mind, but I realized that life does change. A new structure was built, and it was nice to see that Willie and Elaine kept the same roof line. Retirement was not part of my dad's makeup, so when he sold Bridge Street, he brought many of his things home to the double garage on Nassau Street. He never stopped working. It was just not in his makeup. Dad drove school bus. His route took him to Coal Hill when the road was a cow path. Don Hendricks of Hendren Funeral Home hired my dad, where he had a multitude of jobs. What a difference it was to see him in a suit, not in garage clothes. I think you must be tired of me now, so I will leave you with one last story. As I mentioned, my dad brought many things to his garage at the house, and as a family, it was our pleasure to spend time helping and tinkering around up there with him. Dad asked that my son Lee find a time to come and help him move some things that were too heavy for him to lift. Being a teenager, Lee was busy tuning up his '68 Camaro so it had that loud, cool sound that was popular in that era. We found an evening, so Dad, Lee, and I congregated at the garage, moving things and visiting. As Lee started his car and noisily pulled away, a strange look came over my dad's face. When I inquired what the problem was, he replied, "If I had that car for an hour or so, I could fix it. I could take that noise out of that car." I smiled, hugged my dad, all the time thinking of the hours, the money, and work that Lee had put in the last couple of weeks to make his car sound that way. Different generations. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the Foster Garage.
Any connections to the Foster Garage? I think they just used family. Our cruise continues on to the bridge. And this is the second bridge, of course. As we cruise over that second bridge, we come to Herman Kidd's blacksmith shop. On the opposite corner in the 1920s, Bill Baker and Sons operated a garage. Then in 1925, Amberson Davis operated the garage until 1931. And then he moved the business to 63 Queen Street. We all remember that, I think. Then there was even B.A. Pumps on the side of the road in front of West Leonard's hardware store. I'll remember that one. Elwood Charlton isn't well, but was very interested in our endeavor. Sheila Garrett will enlighten us on Davis and Charlton's garage, as she is Elwood's second cousin. Sheila?
Yes, I'm still on, and I think I have to eat this mic for everyone to hear. Is that it? Yeah. On behalf of the Charlton family, we have put together a bit of history on the Davis and Charlton service station located at 63 Queen Street. The following is a write-up from an interview in 1975 with Doug Davis and Bruce Charlton by the Lakefield leader that pretty well describes the history of their garage. Service and satisfaction have always been the keynote of auto repairs performed by the Davis and Charlton Texaco service station. Perhaps that is one of the reasons that Doug Davis and Bruce Charlton are still in business at this time, and in Doug's case, after 50 years of continuous service to the motoring public, and in Bruce's case, the record is only a matter of 6 years less. Doug was a son of Jesse Allen and Amberson Davis. He grew up on the family farm on the 15th concession of Smith Township, north of Young's Point. The family moved into the village in 1920, and Amberson Davis was employed at a local sawmill for 3 or 4 years. Jobs were scarce in those days, Doug tells us. And because he was mechanically inclined, Amberson Davis took a job with Roland Bullock, who operated a garage in the former Midland Hotel on Queen Street, and it was just across the street from the Royal Bank. Anderson learned considerable about automobiles, and after a year, he opened his own shop on the corner of Bridge and Water Streets in March of 1925. Doug Davis joined his father in the garage business a month later, on the site of the present Hamlin's Frosted Food Store, and has been servicing cars for 50 years since then. Transportation was in a very different state from what it has become. The horseless carriage had just arrived on the scene. The first automobile was produced in or about 1909. 15 years later, Doug decided to build his future around it. At the age of 16 years, he became his father's right-hand man, automobile mechanic and gas station attendant. Conscientious by nature and thorough, and starting as he did at an early age while the automobile was still an object of curiosity, Doug studied every part of every machine he got anywhere near until he was an expert on almost any model. In addition, he served as an engineer in the Lakefield Fire Department for 50 years. He recalls that in those early days, Model T Fords, Chev 490s, Buicks, and Stars were the vehicles that were most commonly worked on. They were much, much simpler to repair than the later models because there was lots of room around the motor and you could get at it to do the repairs. There were not so many modifications as in today's models. Gasoline in those days, Doug's recall, sold for 26 or 27 cents a gallon, not a liter. Cars were off the road for 4 months of the year because they just couldn't cope with the roads in those days in the snowy weather. That was before antifreeze and snow tires had been developed for the comfort of the motorist. Depending on the weather, we closed up in December and were closed until sometime in April, he said. Guess they went on winter holidays. There were 3 other garages in town when they opened. Roland Bullock's garage was on the northeast corner of Queen and Reed Street. Russell Ball's garage was beside the Tanner Drug Store Company on East Queen Street, and Bill Leggett's garage was located down on Water Street where Wallace Hendren now lives. In 1931, there wasn't much work in Lakefield, so I was pleased with the idea of a partnership with Mr. Davis and Doug, Bruce Charlton told the leader. There's a big difference today in the amount of business compared in those early days, he went on. The business is up now from only a few years ago, even though we no longer stay open on Sundays or holidays. After 6 years at the Bridge Street location, Bruce Charlton, then 24 years old, went into partnership with Anderson Davis and his son Doug. As they moved the business to its present site at 63 Queen Street, we rented the livery stable from Dr. Michael Kennedy to start with, Bruce said, and we sold McCall Frontenac gasoline under the Red Indian brand name. In 1935, Doug married Grace McElmoyle, who has been active in church work, curling, and the Women's Institute over the years. Then, about 1935 or 1936, McCall, Frontenac, and the Texaco Company merged. The gasoline became known as the Texaco brand. The Texaco Company bought the property from Jack Medill, who held the mortgage, and they built the front service station. We rented the whole works from them for about 10 years, Bruce recalled. Then we bought the property. I do a lot of service work, Bruce said, like repairing tires, selling gas, and other automotive accessories, as well as keeping things in order. Roger Davis does the bookkeeping and leaves the mechanical repairs to his brother Doug. We used to go out on towing calls quite often at night, as we belong to the Ontario Motor League. We still belong, but now we don't take many night calls. After I became a part of the Davis and Charlton Texaco garage, I just kept working away at it, Bruce explained. When I get into something, especially when the business is increasing steadily, as was the case, I just don't like to jump ship. Doug's younger brother, Roger, known as Rod, graduated from Lakefield High School and Normal School in Peterborough and became a school teacher. He finished teaching at Youngs Point Public School just before enlisting to serve in World War II. He joined the Lanark and Renfrew Scottish Regiment and served overseas. Upon his return from the war, teaching jobs were not plentiful, so Rod decided to join his brother in the garage business and became the bookkeeper. Rod was a very talented actor and an artist who painted wonderful scenes on the front window of the garage for every special occasion. In 1942, Bruce Charlton married Vera McEnroy and they made their home in Lakefield. Bruce said, "I didn't have far to go to work each day, as we lived next door to the garage. So I was able to scoot home for lunch each day and keep an eye on things during the weekend. It's given us a good living and enabled Vera and I to raise our 3 children, Elwood, Helen, and Linda. We've enjoyed life even though the hours have been long at times. It's a satisfying occupation, serving your friends for more than 44 years, Bruce said. It's nice to be in touch with the public and to feel that you can give them the service they need at a price they can afford to pay. Many a time on a really cold winter's day with the mercury standing at 20 or 30 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, we'd find ourselves out all day either towing cars or getting them started or pulling them out of snowdrifts. At a meeting of Texaco Fuels held in Peterborough in March 1975, the company presented the 2 remaining members of the firm with long service plaques. Doug Davis's award is for emeritus service in the garage business for over half a century, and Bruce Charlton received recognition for his 44 years of meritorious service and faithful devotion to duty. That ends the interview that was with Doug and Bruce in 1975. And now we move on. In 1976, my husband, Roy Garrett, found himself laid off from the Laval Company in Peterborough and in need of a job. He landed a job working at Davis and Charlton service station after King's Hollinghead retired. His fellow employees at that time were Jack Spargo, Ken Lockie, Rod and Doug Davis, and Bruce Charlton. They were a great team who worked well together. Doug and Ken took care of all the mechanical work, and Jack handled all the electrical work. Roy and Bruce looked after running to the gas pumps, pumping gas, changing tires, doing the oil changes, and general car maintenance, while Rod was the bookkeeper. Word has it that Jack Spargo was one of the best tune-up people around. He always gapped new spark plugs to the correct setting before he put them in the car. He never simply opened the spark plug box and put the new spark plugs in. Doug was very accommodating to the local Peterborough County School Board buses, serving them on short notice. If a bus came in and needed a new motor, Doug would start working on it immediately and thought nothing of working late into the night just to get it back on the road as quickly as possible. The Davis and Charlton's garage also looked after the vehicles for the Hendren Funeral Home. Don always brought his own bucket of oil with him when he needed his vehicle's oil change. Roy remembers Don Hendren coming over to the garage one day with an unusual request. He had brought over a body bag that had a rip in it and was in need of repair. Well, that was an experience in itself. It was made of a rubber material and needed a patch. So Bruce took it into the back shop, put a tire patch on it, which made it good as new, and Don left the happy man. Another time, a gentleman came in to get his snow tires put on for the winter. Bruce took his car into the back shop, took the summer tires off, and put on the snow tires. He brought the car back out to the front and parked it in the front of the garage. Later that day, the gentleman came in to pick up his car, and he discovered that Bruce had put the snow tires on the back wheels of the vehicle, only to learn that the car was a front-wheel drive. Poor Bruce. He had to take the car back into the back shop and try again. The lads never let Bruce forget that one. Doug would often hire a student for the summer months to help with pumping gas and general daily shop cleanup. Jack Spargo and Ken Lockey enjoyed having fun with the new man on the block. One day, Jack decided to give the lad a container and sent him down to the Lakefield Creamery for a can of steam. Well, away he went, and of course the creamery people knew the drill, so they took the container to the back room and in a few minutes were back and returned it to the lad, who hurried back to the shop with his container of steam. Jack opened the container and there was nothing in it. Well, the lad looked bewildered and told Jack that the chap at the creamery went to the back room and filled it. By this time, both Jack and Ken were in stitches, and the lad knew that the joke was on him. Did any of you have to go to the creamery to get a can of steam? Another time, Ken asked the lad to run down to the hardware store to get a box of left-threaded bolts. He was gone for the longest time before he came back empty-handed, explaining that he couldn't find any, and the store clerk never heard of them. Then he realized that he had been tricked. Those jokesters. By 1978, the Davis brothers and Bruce Charlton decided it was time to retire. Doug, after 53 years of serving the public, and Bruce had 47 years in the business. The business was put up for sale and sold to Peter Coster. After a few months working with Peter, Jack Spargo decided it was time for him to retire. Peter hired Tom Cook as a mechanic, along with friends Barry and Peggy Lockwood. Barry was also a mechanic, and Peggy became the bookkeeper. Roy stayed on working for Peter until the summer of '79, when he took a job as a custodian at an area high school. Shortly after Roy leaving, Peter took the gas pumps out and concentrated on serving vehicles until his retirement in 2004, when he sold the business to Ron Ellis. Peter placed an ad in the Lakefield newspaper and thanked his loyal customers for their patronage throughout his 27 years of service at his Lakefield location, and said that he was proud to pass the reins of his business on to Ron Ellis. Some years later, Ron Ellis purchased the Spencer home next door to the service station and demolished the home to make room for a larger parking lot. Ron Ellis continues to operate Ron Ellis Automotive Service Station at this location, serving the local community. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone any connection with that garage? No? Okay. As we cruise on up the street, we come to 132 Queen Street. On the northeast corner of Queen and Concession Streets in the 1940s, an Esso station is located, run and owned by Russ Hopkins, with the help of two of his sons, Milt and Ray. Dan Farrell will tell us about this garage, as the Hopkins family was too shy. Dan's not shy. Oh, I gotta turn mine off, sorry, just a minute.
Good? Excellent? Okay. All right, thanks, Sharon. So my name's Dan Farrow. Some of you know me. More of you know my parents, Woody and Brenda. I'm going to speak on behalf of the RB Hopkins Garage and Motor Sales. I have no direct connection myself, although I have bought a couple of cars off Larry. All right, so Russell, or Russ Hopkins, was one of 8 children born to William and Ann May Hopkins in 1896 in Ram, Ontario. On December 11th, 1917, Russ married Ruth Ann Wheaton and moved to Curve Lake to start a new life and raise a family of their own. Russ began his interest in automobiles at the age of 18 when he was working as a chauffeur in Rama. By 1921, Russ and Ruth were living in Peterborough with 2 small children, Milton and Aileen. And by 1930, the Hopkins family had grew as Ruth had birthed 8 children. In the early 1940s, Russ and son Milt owned and operated Hopkins Esso service station and car dealership at 132 Queen Street in Lakefield, where the Pizza Hut and Tim Hortons are today. Russ owned the two-story building and operated a car dealership and gas bar business, and Milt owned the building next door with the service bays where he serviced vehicles. Milt also served in World War II, working as a mechanic, where he was based at the Trenton Air Base, and upon returning home went to work at the family business. Milt was a happy-go-lucky guy who always greeted everyone with a big, genuine smile. Russ and his family dealt with the loss of his wife and mother, Ruth, just before Christmas in 1945, and sadly, in 1950, Milt was killed in a car accident on Easter weekend. Russ was a nice fellow and was involved in the community. One year he supported the men's hockey team by buying them red sweaters with the Henry J's written on the front. When Russ felt Ray was old enough, he allowed Ray to help out with the family business. Russ sold the buildings and moved to Water Street for a few years, only to return to Lakefield, where he purchased and built in the early 1950s, R.B. Hopkins Motor Sales at the now Julienne Plaza. This is where Ray joined him, selling Kaiser Fraser cars and Leader tractors and Esso gas. There's a story about a time when Russ had received a call from a customer saying that his Henry J wouldn't start. So Russ sent Ray and Harley Coons to Buckhorn to try and bring the cars back to Lakefield. Well, they chained the two bumpers tight together, and Coons took off with Ray and the Henry J doing the steering. When they went through Selwyn, Neil Blewett got on the phone and called Russ. He told him that Coons had just went by doing at least 85 miles per hour, and that crazy son of yours is trying to pass him. But Russ just laughed it off. Russ sold the building to Jim Crawford in the late 1950s and moved his business next door and built a small building with gas pumps where the Ultramar is located today. He sold used cars at this location and Royal Gasoline until 1962, when a few months after Ray had married Mila Pearson, his longtime sweetheart, tragedy again struck and Russ suddenly passed away. Ray moved the cars across the road to his father's home, which was located across from the Julienne Plaza, to sell them off for Russ's estate. Ray, like his father, was a friendly, pleasant, and fair man, as well as a practical joker. Ray decided to carry on in the car sales business and opened his own car lot down on Old Highway 28 across from the Dunford Chickens farm in 1963. Ray, with the help of his father-in-law, Stanley Pearson, built a new office and garage which still operates today as Hopkins Motor Sales. Ray ran a very successful business until 2006 with his sons Jeff and Larry. Ray passed away just before Christmas in 2010. Larry still manages Hopkins Motor Sales today and carries on the car sales tradition. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Anybody with a connection to the Hopkins? Oh, there we are. Okay.
Around 1953, the Manser family purchased Russ Hopkins' Queen and Concession Street property. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Mary Kingdom, who has come from Campbellford to round out the history of this location. Mary?
Is it on? Yep. 15-piece bucket. Okay, Shannon Super Test Show and Red Deer Gas Bar. Eat the mic. Before the Kingdom family arrived on the scene, Art and Frankie Manser purchased the Queen at Concession Street property. They owned and operated Shannon's Super Test gas station and lunch bar at 132 Queen Street in Lakefield. It was a popular location, being close to the arena. In the early 1960s, Linda Farrow worked at the Shannon Snack Bar, at the small food counter that served great hamburgers and fresh-cut French fries.
They also sold snacks like potato chips, chocolate bars, and pop. Kids from the skating rink frequented the store. Shannon's was also the daily bus stop to catch a ride to Peterborough and beyond. In 1962, Art Manser decided to build a bowling alley next door as an added attraction on the corner. By February 1963, it was up and running, offering league games and recreational bowling. Ron and Randy Jessup used to set pins for the Mansers, along with many teens in the early 60s. When Art Manser owned the bowling alley on Queen Street, he would sometimes be found napping at his desk. On one particular night, two young lads were drag racing north through the village at a terrible speed. As the first car reached the Manser garage, he lost control, went into a tailspin, going round and round through the lot. He took out the gas pumps and stopped up against the building where Art Manser was sleeping at his desk inside. Thank goodness Art was not hurt. The second car didn't make it as far as the Manser garage, as he hit the large rock in front of the Anglican church, bounced off that, creamed across Regent Street, and ended up taking the front porch off of what was then the Northey House, now the real estate office. The porch was never replaced. Does anyone know the outcome of this wild night in our quiet village of Lakefield? The bowling alley was doing well in a popular spot. Then disaster struck. A local newspaper write-up tells the story. On September 15, 1963, Shannon's bowling alley on Queen Street in Lakefield, built only 8 months ago at a cost of $50,000, was gutted by fire Sunday night. Owners of the 6-lane alley are Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Manser, who for the last 10 years have been operating a gas station and a snack bar adjacent to the bowling alley. Inspectors from the fire marshal's office were to investigate the site today. 20 firemen under the direction of Chief Alan Clark of the Lakefield Fire Department fought the fire for 4 hours. Assisting them was Port Hope's Fire Chief John Record, who was visiting Lakefield at the time. There was considerable smoke damage to the snack bar and the apartment above it, where Art and Frankie Manser lived. The bowling alley was only partially insured. The fire was noticed by a customer shortly after 8 p.m. Mrs. Frankie Manser, who was serving gasoline at the time, gave the alarm. She said later that the fire must have started just after the alleys closed at 4:30 p.m. They were open for 1 p.m. It started somewhere at the back, she said. By the time the firemen arrived, the building was filled with black smoke, and they had to break through the roof in 3 places to get at the blaze. A blast apparently blew a door open at the rear of the building, and a car parked nearby had its side windows broken and paint burned. The car was owned by a Toronto man who worked for W.A. Ryder's paving company in Toronto and was working in the Lakefield area. Art Manser said the alleys were fully booked for league games, which were to start today. Busy weekend traffic had to be rerouted around Lakefield. I understand that Art Manser sold the business to Joe Fair. The Fair family owned and operated the garage for a period of time before selling the business. We moved to Lakefield in the summer of 1971. My parents, Paul and Mary Kingdom, bought the gas bar and bowling alley from the Fairs. The gas bar was called Seabrook's Discount Gas, and later on, not sure how much later, it became an Esso station. I think that's when the name was changed to Red Deer. It wasn't a fully fledged garage. We didn't do any mechanical repairs on vehicles. We sold gas, Quaker State oil, transmission fluid, and windshield washer fluid. We were a full-serve station in the sense that we didn't just pump your gas, but we checked your oil, cleaned your windshield, and my dad taught me to clean snow off windows, headlights, and taillights in the winter. When we moved to Lakefield, I was 10 years old and loved to learn how to do the job. I remember one day I went to serve a customer and he wanted his oil checked. I wanted my dad to be proud of me. So instead of getting my dad, I opened the hood, found the dipstick, and checked the oil. He needed some. I was getting the quart of oil when my dad came out and took over. He apologized to the customer, who seemed amused by a 10-year-old's enthusiasm. Our home was in the same building as the gas station. The gas bar was in front and our living quarters were in the back. When we first moved there, someone was renting an apartment upstairs, but after they moved out, we took it over and made more bedrooms for us. My granny moved in too. There were 6 of us kids, so as the years went by, as we got older, Dad had enough employees in us. They were long days though for my parents, as the business was open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., 7 days a week. There were a couple of times that Dad hired someone to pump gas. One of those times was a young fella named Wayne Courier. Dad called him Crash. I'm not sure why. You'd have to ask Wayne about that. Had something to do with a car we got. The gas station also served as the local Voyageur bus depot. We sold tickets to passengers, and sometimes there were parcels too. One notable passenger was Canadian author Margaret Lawrence. There was also a time when my dad sold work boots. I don't think that pursuit was successful. We renovated a bit, and our dining room table ended up in front of a big window. A few times our Sunday dinner was interrupted by people thinking we were a restaurant. My mom was a good cook. She should have pursued that, I think. Because we lived at the business, there were some late night phone calls from the Lakefield police. Stranded, out of gas travelers would contact the police looking for a gas station. The police would ask my parents to open up to help the person out. My parents never said no. There was one Christmas morning and my parents were putting gas in our car. Christmas, by the way, was the only day we were closed. Next thing they knew, there was a line of cars needing gas. No one was turned away. They always helped people if they could. I think the highlight of my gas pumping career was when I was 16. My mom was originally from New Brunswick, and she and my dad and 3 younger siblings went on a trip down east for 10 days or so. My older brother and sister weren't living at home by then, so that left me to run the place. I was so proud. That was the only vacation I remember my parents ever taking. So that was in '77. My mom passed away in September of 1980. Even though I was left alone when they were on vacation, Tom Birch and Don Nissen checked up on me. And I can't forget Mr. and Mrs. Bill Hamblin, who lived across the road. They kept an eye on things too. Fast forward to April 1st, 1981. That's the day the place burned down. My little brother Tom was home, and my sister Jan was upstairs in bed, absent from school because she was sick, and Dad was serving a customer. Next thing Dad knew, Tom tells him there's a fire, and by the time Dad got inside, he said things were spontaneously combusting. He tried to put it out with an extinguisher, but realized it was in vain. Dad ran up the back stairs fire escape and saved my granny. At the front of the building, I had to break a window to get my sister out. I was at my hockey coach's house with another girl on my team. We were preparing for the upcoming weekend. Lakefield was going to host the Women's Provincial Hockey Championships. I lost all my hockey equipment in the fire, and that was devastating to me. My team, however, bought me new skates, and Niels Pind opened the rink so that I could get used to them before the tournament. As the gas pumps weren't damaged by the fire, our neighbor, Eric Bullock, built a structure that my dad could operate his business from. Dad was able to rent a house on Chippewa Street, and we moved there. Shortly after that, I moved out. I guess Dad was having a hard time making ends meet, and the station closed. A few years after the fire, a gas kiosk was located on the corner of Concession and Queen Streets that just sold gas and smokes for a number of years, and then it was taken down. Later, the Pizza Hut building was built further back from the street, with the parking lot out front, possibly due to the gas tanks being buried there. Next door, on the north side of the Pizza Hut, a Tim Hortons donut and coffee shop was built, complete with drive-through, and they are still in operation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was great. Anybody work down the dikes? Oh, and it. Very good. Jerry did too. Great.
Yeah, right.
Just a little further up the street, we come to the Shell service station at 151 Queen Street. My daughter Cheryl Pierce will give us a brief history of the various businesses on this property.
As we come to the last stop, before we turn it over to the Wasson family, we thought we'd give a bit of history on the property at 151 Queen Street, as my mom said, going back to the 1890s. In the mid-1890s, the southeast corner of Queen and Strickland Street was home to James John Chadgett Sign and Paint Shop, as well as the family residence. James had immigrated to Canada in 1889 and settled in Bradford, Ontario, marrying Emma Jane Mason in Newmarket. Emma Jane Mason was the daughter of Thomas Mason and Elizabeth Smith, who was a sister to Ida Mason, which is Mrs. Wilbur Webster, who was Dawn Webster's grandmother. By 1895, the family had settled in Lakefield. James was highly skilled in the trade of carriage painting, where he had painted fine designs and patterns on carriages of the wealthy. He repaired, sanded, painted, and many sleighs and wagons for the locals working on the sleighs in the summer and wagons in the winter. In 1905, the Chadgett family moved to Peterborough, and James set up his paint shop on Simcoe Street, just behind King's Hotel. It is not known what happened to Queen Street Chadgett residence and carriage shop after the family moved to Peterborough, but the property was a vacant lot for some time until shortly after the Second World War. It was then that two local Army veterans, Harold Hopkins and Irwin Shorty Tarleton, decided to combine their efforts and build a garage and service station on the property in late 1945 and early 1946. They didn't operate it for long, and it was sold after a year to Harold Hopkins, who was a brother to Cyril or Cy Hopkins. We don't believe that's a relative of Russ or his sons Milt or Ray, who were longtime garage operators, as you heard. After the garage foray, Harold had a lifelong career with LCBO Liquor Store, and Shorty Tarleton moved to the United States. Shorty was an older brother to our Fred Tarleton of Lakefield. In the late 1940s, Percy Archer operated the Lakefield Motor Sales, selling Minneapolis Moline farm equipment, Evinrude Motors, Shell products, and operated a fully equipped garage. By the late 1950s and early 60s, it was owned by Ted Johnson of Toronto and was leased to Bruce Beckwith. Bruce hired Desmond Foley as his mechanic. Desmond had previously worked as a mechanic for Orville Redpath Construction, located across the way on Strickland Street, where the apartment building is located today. An article from the Peterborough Examiner reads as follows. On Friday afternoon of December 31st, 1960, the Shell garage was gutted by a flash fire. Stock valued at $10,000 was destroyed. It was partially covered by insurance, and there was no estimate on the damage to the building at press time. EC Bruce Beckwith of the Shell service station said the fire started at 3:30 p.m., caused by a welding torch in the repair shop. Desmond Foley was welding shop equipment at the time of the blaze. Sparks from the welding torch ignited new and used tires which covered two walls of the shop made a ready fuel for the fire. Mr. Foley was burned about the head and hands and as he attempted to put out the flames. He was given treatment by Dr. Hugh Gassel of Lakefield, but was not taken to the hospital. The Lakefield Fire Department responded quickly to the call and kept the fire in check. At one time, there was danger of possible explosion if the flames had reached a drum of kerosene and fuel oil, but the firemen kept a steady stream of water on the drum. Both Fire Chief Alan Clark and Bruce Beckwith had nothing but praise for the 21 firemen who fought the blaze through dense black smoke for 2.5 hours. The firemen did a first-class job, said Fire Chief Clark. It was a tough fire, and I was proud of them. We were thankful that we had lots of men and lots of water. The fire did not affect the retail gas pumps. We are still in business, Bruce said, but this was a hard way to start the new year. Sandwiches and hot coffee were served to the firemen by the Red Cross workers under the direction of Mrs. Clarence Foster and Mrs. Stan Goodall. In my day, this was owned by the Wasson family, and I'd like to now call on John Wasson to tell the story of his dad's Wasson Shell service station.
Hello. So I'm John, that's Andy. We both worked at the gas station. But you know what, Andy, after I heard all these wonderful stories about all the other gas stations, I don't want to say anything about it.
It was a good place to work.
Well, it was around 1962 when my dad bought the gas station, and locals used to call him Chub Wasson. For years I always wondered, well, why would a man wear a gas station shirt around with his name Chub on it? But Andy knows why.
Yeah, just so it's very clear, Dad never got the name Chub because it had a big barrel. He actually, my grandfather, Ralph, which many of you likely knew maybe at the time, but my grandfather had a nickname for every one of his sons. Neil was Nipper, Don was Red, Dean was Ralph, and Joe. So anyways, Dad was actually called Chub when he was born, and that name stuck with him for the rest of his life. And my son came tonight and actually has Dad's shirt on that says Chub on it. So if you can believe it or not, Dad actually wore that shirt. So at one time he was a small guy.
I wish you'd have told me that before I went around thinking that I was chubby because of my... Dad bought it in about 1962. He was working for Peterborough Canoe and they went out of business, so he bought the gas station. He bought it from a fellow named Ted Johnson. Des Foley was still working there. And yeah, they took care of the business. And back then the motto was service with a smile. And I can remember one time going out to pump gas. It was a particularly hot, muggy day, and a young fellow pulled in the convertible, and he had his girlfriend with him, and she had a bikini on. Well, I wasn't that old, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a bikini. So I had my sponge, and I was scrubbing those bugs off that windshield, and I was pushing really hard. And my hand slipped up over the edge because the top was down. And the sponge went and hit the guy in the face. Well, I was already embarrassed because I couldn't keep my eyes off the passenger side. However, I got the sponge back and I apologized to the gentleman, but I did do a nice job on the windshield. And that was service with a smile. We had a lot of different people from Lakefield that actually worked there. Bill Webster, Darrell Revoy, Steve Crow, Neil Bullock, who else? Ken Jackman, Ken Watson, Ted Rose, Phil Jessup, Jim Doyle, and even my grandfather worked there. Ron?
Did you work there? Ron Hogarth?
No. But Andy, don't make things up, okay? Even Andy worked there. Yeah. The police used to come in and stop and visit. I'm not sure why. Just keep an eye on us, I guess. But yeah, they would visit now and then. I remember Garnet Samus used to pull in, and because the door was, you could pull in and you could pull up right by the front door, and Garnet would just sit in the car like somebody else and honk or toot or turn the lights on, and you'd come out and he'd have a little visit with Dad, and then that'd be the end of that. But things were different a lot back then. People used to pull in there, they'd do the same thing. They'd have the 40-ouncer between their legs and they'd say, could you get me a bottle of mix? So we'd go out, we'd come out with the Coke and take their money and away they go. So that was the first, we should have patented that one, that was drive-through, right? Do you want to tell us about the tow call and the tow business?
Yep, sure. Yeah, as many of you know, Dad had a tow truck, and we were very, very busy towing cars in, mostly on weekends, of course, because you know, at that time, you could do things that you can't do now, and there seemed to be a lot more accidents. But, you know, as John and I were at home at the time, we couldn't wait till the phone, we would hear the phone ring at 1 o'clock in the morning, or 2 o'clock in the morning, at 3, whatever it may be, and we would both jump out of bed and say, okay, I'm going to go with you, Dad, and wait to get into the car and, you know, go on the tow call. Well, you know, at our lot, we didn't have a yard to put the cars, and they would always be parked at the garage on a Saturday night, and there were always wrecks there almost regularly every weekend. So, you know, thank you to the people that would drive by, because they'd always come in for gas, and they'd come in, and that was, we always thought that was our attraction to getting, you know, more people coming in buying gas, was that the cars were always there, and everyone was in to look. But anyways, you know, I'll never forget it when I was a kid, that the night that, if everyone knows the Bullocks, Ralph Bullock, I'm sure a lot of people you know Ralph, but I'll never forget it. I came in the morning, and Dad had woke up in the morning. He says, well, when you get in there, he says, take a look at Ralph's car. So I went down, and I'll tell you, that car was totaled. I don't think of all the cars we had in there that there was one that had been worse than that, and Ralph literally walked away from that car. So I don't know whether it was the alcohol, that he was nimble, or what it was, but anyways, he did survive, so it was quite interesting. But you know, Dad prided himself in going out and looking after the provincial police would call regularly. You know, he would call late at night, and you know, I'll never forget, and this is a bit of a sad story, but you know, we went in the tow call. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I jumped up with my father, and I said, Dad, can I go with you? And he said, sure. So I jumped in the truck. We got to the wreck, and Dad wouldn't let me get out of the truck. And I says, Dad, like, I always get out and help you. He says, you stay in the car. Anyways, it happened to be one of our local boys, Delbert Thompson at the time, and Dad was very upset by that. Or Bernard, sorry, Del's son. But anyways, you know, there was a lot of times where we would go on those accidents, and a lot of people were hurt too. So it was very difficult. That was a difficult night for us. And of course, they lived around the corner from us, and a bit of a sad story, but you know, there was a lot of good things that that Dad did for the community, we always thought. And he worked hard, and it was for our family. And you know, we really enjoyed the people that came in there. You know, but when John and I were working, we always thought the best part of it was with all the people that would come in, like Doug Hamlin. I think John might get onto that, but you know, I'll never forget one time, one guy, I had started working at the garage, Judy, when I was 12. I know you started when you were 14, but anyways, I beat you by 2 years. Anyways, and I started working when I was 12, and some guy, a gentleman came in for gas, and he was a regular. And he came in for gas, and he jumped out of the car, and he had a $20 bill in his hand. And at that time, $20 was a lot of money. And he came in and he says, $10, put $10 in gas. And I heard him. So I'm sitting there and I fill up the car, and I look and I said, oh shit, I put $20 in. Anyways, so I walked into the garage and I thought, okay, how am I going to handle this? I walked in and I said, $20. And he says, $20? I says, well, yeah, you had a 20 in your hand. And he says, well, Jesus Christ, if I had 100, would you put that in there? And he kept coming back, so it wasn't that bad.
Well, I could always count. Yeah, lots of fun stories, and I do remember a time when Dad walked out of the garage and a blue Pontiac came in a rather bit of a hurry, popped open the back trunk, and I'm looking out, and Dad's looking in the back of the trunk. So what's going on now? And he waves me out, and I come out, and there's a deer in the trunk of the car. And he says, I just bought that deer. Okay, what do you want me to do? And he says, you and Dad take it into the washroom and clean it up. So the mechanic and I took it into the washroom, put the out order sign on the men's washroom, and we skinned the deer in there and quartered it. Grabbed the hacksaw off the bench. I was cleaning up hair for months after. Yeah. Lots of crazy things that happened. I remember one fella on the weekend came in and dropped the battery off. The battery was, it needed to charge. So we usually fill it up with some muriatic acid and then put it on the charger. Well, I was kind of fresh at it and I had a lot to learn. I put brake fluid in. Well, and then I put it on the charger. I had that part right. But I don't know if you know what brake fluid on a battery charger smells like. But it's not roses. So I come in the next, and Dad's got the Ford Martin there on the septic system. Because the whole garage smells like crap. Well, Ward's guy, he's pumping the tank out, and the tank was back in the bay where the hoist was. It was actually inside the building. And so he's pumping it away. The truck's outside, and the hose pops out of the top of the truck. Oh, I had a lot of windows to clean. Yeah, I made an awful mess of the parking lot and the windows. But we paid him and he left. We had a lot of good people that hung out down there, and remember Don McFadden used to stop in. He used to love to get a plug of chug tobacco. Walter Hamilton, he used to do a little step dance for you if you could, if you said the right, talk to him nice, you know. Doug Hamlin, Per Scalberry, Ken Moore, there was lots of people that stopped in and made the stay quite good. You used to remember Cephas Little, because Cephas just lived up on Strickland Street. And Cephas would walk down by the garage all the time. Sometimes he'd pop in and say a bit. Most of all, he would just head down, and when he got to the main street there, he'd just keep right on walking. He didn't care if the cars were coming. Have his cane, and he'd walk right across, and if you got stopped, about 2 feet in front of him, that was too close. He'd lift the cane up and whack the hood of the car. And away he'd go across the street. Yeah. Collected bottles of newspaper, and then he'd go down to Hamlin, so I'm told, because my sister worked down there, my sister Glenna, did ice cream at Hamlin's, and he'd pull out the Noxzema jar and have it roll in there and pay for his lunch. I remember one time I had a hot rod, I had a bit of a hot rod, and Dad decided, well, I'm going to take this thing for a spin. So he wheels it around Lakefield there for a little bit. Pulls, as he's coming into the garage, he slows down, but then he tried to do the power spin, you know, the cool. And the only thing is he did it right in front of the cop. So he wheels it around, pulls in, the cop stops the car, pulls out, and he's got his gun on Dad. I guess he thought he was robbing the place, I don't know. But anyways, after a bit of talking, Dad didn't get charged, and I got the car back. Yeah. We did have some tragedy there as well. Andy, I don't know if you want to go in on the... you want to talk about that? Huh? About Dad getting burned.
Oh, that, yeah.
Oh.
Well, like, you...
Okay. Yeah, so he was working late in the garage, and he was working on a carb, and I think if you're doing that, you know that you don't want anybody to try to start it while you're doing that, especially if there's a fuel leak around. But, so as it happened, he was a little too close to it when somebody tried to start it, and of course, fumes ignited, and he was burned quite badly, and that's when Dad did the stop, drop, and roll. And he was rolling around the parking lot, and he got the Corporal Banbury was the fellow's name, the policeman that was there, and he took Dad's shirt off before it got too bad, and they went into St. Joe's Hospital. And that was the time then you and I went down and took over the operation of the garage.
Yes.
And
say something about that? Yes, sir. In saying that, and when that happened, Judy, you know, the first phone call we got was from your dad, and to offer to help. And so, you know, we really respected that and thought that that was just an awesome thing to do. You know, Gord offered to give us any help that we needed, and as a family, we really appreciate that. So thank you.
No, that's true. We always had a lot of respect for Coils and Coils Garage for sure.
Even though we were both Shell stations.
Right, they sold a lot more gas than we did.
We raised 6 kids.
You were having more fun.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
So in 1984, after 22 years in the garage business, Dad sold it. And it stayed, remained closed. It was demolished, and a mechanic went on to work for Ralph Preston for a few years, and then Dad's retired. And I think that's probably about all. There's a few more stories. No, we haven't got time.
I told John this story, and he says, "Oh, you shouldn't tell them." And I thought, you know, it was part of the, don't tell them. Right. Believe it or not, you know, times, we always talk about how times were so different back then, but not likely many of you knew this, but Dad was always very wary of, you know, different people coming in. But in all the time that Dad owned that garage, he had a pistol in his pocket. And I don't know if anyone knew, no one not likely ever knew that. And John said, well, I shouldn't tell the story, but I said, well, it doesn't matter now. I mean, Dad's passed away and gone. But, you know, he had a pistol in his pocket, and he would take it home at night and he'd put it under his pillow. So for all those years that you, any of you that did come in for gas, you knew you were safe, because he wasn't shooting you. Anyways, you know, we'd like to really, in honesty, you know, we talk about it all the time, but more it was about the people. It really was about the enjoyment we had of everybody coming in there. And, you know, we always say it really taught us how to deal with people. When I started at 12 years old, it taught me the different types of people you would deal with, and it really gave you a great learning curve as a child. You know, I started working there, I was 12, worked there till I was 19 years old. And we always say also, Dad made us work there because he knew where we were. So, you know, he'd make us work till 11 at night. But, you know, honestly, we'd like to thank the Lakefield community too. It was just a great, great place to grow up, and everyone supported everybody. So, thank you.
Always let me play.
Yeah, there you go.
And I gave your parents some frisbees, grandchildren, because we grew up in a peaceful neighborhood and want their kids.
We love your family. We love your family.
We're cruising, remember? That was a long time ago we started. We made a U-turn, Michelle. That's what happened in the 50s. That's where you made your U-turn. And we headed back to the commercial. Pardon me? It's not coming up?
Yeah. You hear me now? Yeah, okay. Sorry. Well, start over again.
We're cruising, remember? So we make a U-turn at the Shell station and head back to the commercial to see who is hanging out. Now listen carefully, because you might hear a name you know. First we meet Dave Lane, going north to the point, taking Elda Mindel home. And Merv Pearson, Milo Hopkins' brother, and his Henry J., taking Gladys Dunford home to Young's Point too. Jack Sharman is on the commercial steps, talking to Reg Coons. And Jim and Marion Webster are helping Alda up the steps with her wheelchair. Jim heads to the pool room, where Pete Dudko runs a tight ship. No girls allowed. We find Kay Webster serving Jean Dudko's homemade French fries, while the jukebox blares out "Walk the Line" by Johnny Cash. Ray Clancy and Judy Reed are stopped in front of the $5 store, talking to Sharon Jewell and Stan Coons, and Stan's sister Doreen and Al Bonner. Jonesy cruises by in his lime green Dodge van with jackbreaker, and we see Bob Fee with knob valance on the back of his bike fly by. Art Eaton is in his 52 Meteor, purchased from Charlie Crawford. He has Murdoch and Jerry Corkery with him. Jane Bolton, Marie Roseborough, and Linda Webster are walking up the street from Teen Town at the town hall. Marie's looking for Neil Reboy. Anyone see Joe Coons and Carol Dixon? Yes, down at the coal dock. And Clark Wilson and Isabel Coons went to the drive-in. Sally parked her little Morris Mini on the main street and got out to talk to Carolyn Northey when Elmer Graham, whose station wagon was parked in front of a car, drove away, taking Sally's car with him. Apparently, Paul Henry had pulled in behind Sally, bumped her car, and had jumped up onto Elmer's trailer hitch. Can't you just see Sally chasing Elmer down the street on a Saturday night in Lakefield? Oh no. You better slow down at the post office corner as Price is watching. Then out to Crawford's to start over again. If we have any gas left, we could go to Peterborough and cruise down George Street and up Water, or go to see Elvis at the Paramount. Guess what happened to all those wonderful cars of the 50s? Bell City Speedway happened, and these cars wound up going in circles out there until there were no cars left. And all of you are wishing you still had these classic cars. I sure hope we brought back many memories and funny stories. We had a lot of fun preparing this evening. If anyone has any additional information or corrections on any of the garages, stories, or memories that we would like to share, we'd like to hear them. We can do an open mic, or you can write down your memories on the pads we left at each of the tables, if you're too shy to talk on the mic. And we hope you've had a great night. We're going to feed you now. But before we do, we have some thank yous to give. Okay. Ted, you want to come up and give the thank yous, please? Did Ted leave? Ted, yoo-hoo. He's back in the back corner talking. Hello. Come and give the thank yous, please. Anyone who was a speaker, could you come up to the front for us? Thank you. Well, sort of. John, you're a speaker. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Now, there was a special draw that you got tickets for, so I'll get your tickets out there. Tickets out? Okay. Sorry. Thanks, Ben. Jerry drew it last time already. You'll be draw this time. Back on the table when you first came in, there were some different things there that we had collected together that were about cars and stuff. So the number is 817-2145. 817-2145. You didn't. Come on up.
Ron Wilson. Ron is actually going to be our speaker at the end of November. Ron is a teacher forever and ever. So we're going to do school days in the November meeting, so it'll be fun too. Because Ron's fun. Right, Ron? Okay. What else was there? Yes. Sally left you a piece of paper on your tables about like a quiz. A quiz thing? Yep. Did you want the answers? Or you want to wait until after a while when you're busy having coffee? No. Like them now? Okay. The answer to the first one. Corner of Water and Bridge Street. You remember that one? Mr. Bickle was the one with the first car. Chev Bel Air convertible 57 was the answer to the next one. 27 and 52, 29 and 55. Okay, see you later, trying to keep up with me here. $1,500. Okay? 10 miles per hour on the bridge, lads. Whoever did 10 miles an hour. Okay. 29, 18, 23. 8 million. And sick to go was the last one. Okay? Sally had fun figuring those ones out. That was her game. We have kids to speak to you now.
Tonight we have a visitor from the other side of the country, British Columbia to be exactly. John Millage of Virtual Lakefield would like to say a few words. John?
First of all, I'd like to thank the Historical Society for this great weekend. This great presentation tonight. It's been really wonderful. All you ladies. The Lakefield Historical Society has put on a wonderful, wonderful show tonight. It's been really, really great, and there's a lot of memories from a lot of us, especially that rundown of all the people and all the cars. I would like to, on behalf of Vintage Lakefield, just mention the fact that the Vintage Lakefield and the local Lions Club are having and getting ready for a homecoming next August. So watch for the ads that will be coming out soon from the Lions, as well as on the Vintage Lakefield group page. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I don't know about you, but I think from not coming from Lakefield, I think that was a fun and very informative evening. I certainly learned some things about the garage business in Lakefield that I didn't know before. I just want to make a comment that take a chance and look around all the displays. The cookies, coffee, and tea are at the back. And I'd like to mention Corey